Hi, I'm Marina Sirtis, and you're going boldly with Beyond Trek podcast.
A red alert.
I still can't believe that Lower Decks made It's Been a Long Road canon. It's been a long road getting from there to here.
How was it not canon?
Well, because it was a song, and I don't know. Yeah, I guess
It's one of those fourth wall breaks.
which was good.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's canon as so much as it's like a little meta joke. Because if I remember right, he actually reverses it. Doesn't he? Because he says they sure had a long road getting from there to here, or something.
That was it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good old Riker.
If you want to talk about like fourth wall breaks that are canon, it's when that one episode Boimler is in the turbo lift on his way to the bridge to talk to the captain, and he's humming the Star Trek theme song.
Yeah. That's true.
He's in there. He's going da 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 da, and it's like, all right, that's it. That is music in the 24th century now.
Yeah. Mariner is about the most meta character I've ever met. Like, just a walking Trek encyclopedia, kind of like Dag.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Speaking of Dag, welcome to Beyond Trek. I'm Watney. We have Big J, Dag, and a special guest, Brian.
Greetings, everyone.
Yeah, from Star Trek Tempest. He's back on with us again. We're going to be doing a season 1 recap. Just pretty. No, not like a strict outline, nothing like that. We're just going to chat about the season.
We're going to be all over the place.
Maybe all over the place. Who knows what depths we would go.
Well, thanks for coming on with us again, Brian.
To what heights?
To what heights?
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for having me again. I had a blast last time, and like I said, I can always talk about Star Trek at the drop of a hat. And this, so like as I said in the email, it's so special because this is literally the first like new official Trek production that I've actually really liked in 20 years.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And didn't realize it had been quite that long until I actually thought about it for a second. But yeah.
Well,
and what episode were you on with us before? Which review?
I think it was
the
our
premiere.
preview.
it was the
premiere.
The premiere. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, so you were
So-
with us at the premiere, and now we've all watched it, and we're back at the end of the 10 episodes. Beautiful.
So a nice little bookend situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, how did your opinion change? Just real quick before we dive into like a whole thing, from when we started to where we are right now? How would you say that your opinion or feeling changed now that we are 10 weeks since last we saw you?
Definitely for the better. I think I said on the previous episode that I liked a lot of what the first episode did, and as long as it goes in the right direction, it could be something really great.
Totally.
And I think overall, the first season definitely went in the right direction in terms of like having jokes, but not having jokes that break or stop the story in its tracks, and then still actually having a story where you care about the people in it and what happens to them. So I think I made a comparison to Futurama, right? Like it's a little like Futurama and Rick and Morty mixed together, and I felt as long as it went a little bit more into the Futurama direction, then I think it would be really turn into something really great. And I think basically for the most part that's what it did.
Yeah, the pacing, I felt the pacing was one of my like not issues, but it's hard like being used to like hour-long Trek episodes.
Yeah.
And then you like get like 23, 24 minutes maybe. And
It felt more condensed.
it was extremely condensed. And it's like you just have to like just buckle up because like it's just gonna take you wherever.
Well, they didn't really waste any time. It felt like there was not much fat in any of the episodes. It's like every bit of it meant something or had something. So they really took that 24 minutes and made the best of it.
Yeah, they did.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
It's definitely a frenetic pace, but I think I think they found a groove at some point, because I agree, like the first couple of episodes felt a little too, like you had one too many coffees kind of a feeling.
Right.
Where it's just going your brain is going a little bit faster than everything else. But I think they found a nice groove in pacing as the season went on.
I think anybody would be hard pressed to find an empty moment in this show. Like there's times when you're watching DS9, TNG, Voyager, and maybe it's just because 20 years later television has changed so much, but there's some times when you're like, this scene kind of feels like they needed 2 more minutes, and so they filmed this scene to get 2 more minutes, and it's just filler. You would be hard pressed to find something that is absolutely filler in any of these episodes.
Right. A scene or a storyline that was there just to fill out the time slot. I did not get that impression at all. And I would have to say, going into it, into this season, and you guys remember when I brought this up, I was a little worried about the Rick and Morty vibe that we felt was coming into this.
Yeah.
I remember that was the one thing I was worried about, because I had not really seen a lot of Rick and Morty, but I knew that there would be kind of some influence from that, whether it be in the animation style or the humor. And I was just hoping, okay, well, let's see how this does with Star Trek. And I was surprised that was pulled off very well. And so after a couple episodes, really after the first episode, I was convinced and pretty much stopped worrying right there.
Yeah, I would say that any fears that this show was gonna jump the Rick and Morty shark were proven to be very unfounded. Sure, Titmouse Animation does the animation. There was a lot of that sort of feel with some of the reactions that these characters had, but the thought that went into their backgrounds, their connections with each other, and in their own way, the mission of Starfleet rang true for me through all 10 episodes.
The values of Starfleet?
The values, just that the Starfleet feel. This is a ship on various missions, and when this first started to become something we were talking about, we were like, this is the story of the bottom of the barrel on the least important ship in the fleet. So there was definitely some kind of story to tell there. They're not the best of the best. They're not mediocre. They proved that. These people definitely have something to learn. But every episode had more than a nugget of wholesome enjoyment as well as crazy shenanigans.
And I like shenanigans, like the restaurant. Shenanigans.
One thing I thought it did very well, and I was really surprised to see, I think it was able to kind of question and criticize and maybe poke holes at the idea of Starfleet as a perfect organization or the Federation as a perfect utopia or whatever, without like completely undermining the core concepts, like without really saying, well, it's not a utopia at all, or like Into Darkness, where, well, there's a secret Section 31 massive conspiracy thing going on, and with these plot points that are just really go against, at least in my perspective, what Star Trek is about and the strengths of Star Trek as a world. But it was still able to go, okay, here are these guys, here are these people. They're not the best of the best, so they make mistakes. They're still learning. They're still trying to climb to the top, right? Like with the Enterprise, with Next Generation, they were the best of the best. And they talk about how they're the best of the best all the time. You have to be the best of the best to get on the Enterprise. So that goes back to Roddenberry's whole idea of like, well, nobody has any flaws anymore. Everybody's perfect and evolved and blah, 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 which doesn't really work. And so
conflict. Yeah,
it doesn't work either as a realistic depiction of humans or as a way to tell a dramatic story.
Yes.
But this one was the first to like, okay, here are the cracks in the system. Here's where the system gets stressed in this way or that way. But it still overall is kind of has the same core identity that we've seen in other manifestations of it.
Well, and it was interesting that one of the complaints that and there were not a lot, but one of the ones that I tended to see more often than not was just the fact that this crew, and especially these ensigns, were not acting like this was Star Trek. And again, that's from the Not My Trek crowd, that they're too goofy, having too much fun, not being very professional, et cetera, et cetera. And again, you've got to remind yourself, this is not the Enterprise D or the Enterprise E. It's not the Defiant. It's not
even the Titan.
Right. It's not even the Titan.
The least important ship in Starfleet doing the least important jobs.
Yes. And how can you, I just think it would be very difficult to assume that every person in Starfleet is the stuffy, smooth as butter
Shakespeare
person.
reciting.
Right. Shakespeare reciting, sword swinging.
Their idea of a wild night is jazz on the holodeck.
Right. Jazz on the holodeck is a wild night.
Oh my God.
So
I have a hard time thinking Riker isn't a little more like,
oh, he definitely is.
Yeah.
On these ships,
there's even a moment.
Yeah,
there's even a moment in the Perfect Mate episode of Next Generation, which is the one with Famke Janssen, the one where she plays this woman that molds herself to whoever she's supposed to fall in love with.
Yep.
And the episode totally sets it up as, oh, Riker is going to be the foil in this episode because he's Riker, but then they switched around to make it Picard. But in the setup, they do that and they pull Riker back, and he manages to get control of himself and leave the situation before anything goes wrong. He taps his badge and says, "Bridge, I'll be on the holodeck if you need me." And it's a total he's going there to do the things that
I'll be in my bunk.
Would really use. Yeah, exactly. It's I'll be in my bunk moment. Exactly. It's exactly what it is. Yeah. So actually, I think it goes back to something like we were saying the last time, the other episode I was here, where something that Lower Decks has been able to do is to wade a little bit deeper into the stuff as kind of a PG-13 feel. The stuff that was always there, so the same thing of, well, Worf ate a guy, and they didn't really talk about that at all ever. And then in the premiere episode of this, one of the crew members ate a guy, and you sort of saw at least a little bit the ramifications of that. And I think this is another facet of that, of people have an actual sexuality. They like to look at naked people of their preference, and it's stuff that was always there. It's just they're able to get more of it past the censors, or the censors are more willing to let more stuff through than they were on network TV in the 90s.
We don't have to have a complete prim and proper Star Trek anymore.
I think it's very much trying to just normalize regular humanity. If I can take a metaphor, until 1979, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, family life was always portrayed in television as virtually utopian. The houses were always super clean. The mom and the dad and the kids all got along really well. You even watch Happy Days, and there's little dysfunctions in Happy Days, but for the most part, the family units are solid. The houses are extraordinarily well kept. And then you open on Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and the house is a disaster. The kids are running around screaming with their heads cut off. The mom is super overwhelmed, and the dad's totally distracted. And it was one of the first, and arguably the biggest, presentation of normal human life in Middle America.
I too make Devil's Tower mashed potatoes every time I eat mashed potatoes. It's just
are you mocking me?
No. On occasion, I just like to reenact it just a little bit, especially around Thanksgiving.
This is important.
Yes. Yeah.
But I just think that Lower Decks is another one of those shows that's coming along to say, look, the human spectrum is not limited to this prim and proper presentation that we all got. And Star Trek has largely been very prim and proper in sticking its toe in the deep end of the pool. It doesn't do it very often. And this one pushed the envelope on that a little bit by saying, you know what, we are kind of winging it a lot.
Yeah. And that's fine, because this is no longer the television where the husband and wife sleep in separate beds and where everyone gets along. And I think that the interactions with the characters, to me, seems more like what you would expect out of people, just normal people. And to me, it just, whether it was just Trek in the 90s or the ratings or just what it was. But now that I think back on it, there were certainly fewer instances where the crew members seemed to be normal. I mean, in Voyager, you had several moments with Harry Kim and Tom Paris. They seem to come off as pretty normal. And in Next Generation, Geordi and Data seem to more often than not be the ones that would. What's normal, but I guess non-stuffy. DS9, you had O'Brien and Bashir. It's just there were not many times where you felt like you could relate to these characters as everyday people. And with Lower Decks, it made it more, I think, more realistic, the kind of interactions they had, and just how they carried on their day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the whole Utopia thing came really from after the original series and as TNG was forming, and it came from Roddenberry and his kind of like 70s new age sense of, everybody's going to be evolved and individuals are going to be perfect. And that's how, humanity will evolve into some kind of higher form. And I think like I've thought about this a lot in terms of, because I like to think about the economics and the politics sides of things. And I've tried to think what is a realistic Star Trek utopia? Like, how would the actual Federation government be set up, and how exactly would it work in a way that, actually addresses all the systemic problems that exist in our present day society that make it not a utopia? And I feel like that's the distinction between the two, right? The distinction between a utopia built on perfect people and a utopia built on a system that is actually fair and just in its entirety to its whole population, which doesn't mean that individuals in it are perfectly evolved, emotionless, evolved cyborgs. But overall, the society, you can still have a jerk. You can still have a person who doesn't really know how to stand up for themselves. You can still have a, type A, obsessed, only knows how to work personality. You can still have a slacker personality, but they all exist within a societal public institution system that is actually fair and logical and just for everybody, regardless of their race, creed, color, or anything else.
Yeah.
I think Star Trek has, at least since Roddenberry's waning days, it struggled with that. Like, Roddenberry definitely had his perspective, and then ever since, Star Trek has been trying to move it the other way of like, here are these imperfect people, and Lower Decks, I think, really kind of struck a balance of, here are regular people as we would recognize them in the 21st century, but in this setting that's still mostly works as a logical, a self-consistent world for them to live in.
You bring up a good point. Like, a lot of people want to stick to the whole Roddenberryan, carved in ivory that, this is what humankind can rise to when we strive to be our best all the time. And it was a very, I think, comparative to today, it's a very sort of perfectionist ideal. And you can watch the original shows and say, you know, it takes a heck of a lot of dedication and a very specific type of person to be able to succeed in Starfleet. And while post Roddenberry, we have been given those moments where that is not the case. Lower Decks dialed it up to 11 and said, here's a bunch of really imperfect people who probably just barely got by on the skin of their teeth, but they're in Starfleet and they're doing the best with what they have. And quite frankly, they're making it work.
Yeah. Yes. And that was
one thing they've talked about. One thing they've talked about in Star Trek a lot is like, well, we can never really go and see Earth all that much, because if Earth is perfect, then everybody's life on Earth is really super boring. And what does a regular person on Earth, what does their life look like? What does their day-to-day look like? And with Lower Decks, I feel like is the first time where you see characters and you go, okay, well, characters like those, just not in Starfleet living on Earth. And that feels like it would still be a real world with real people.
Yeah.
A real universe and not kind of this idealized construction that Gene Roddenberry put together.
Yeah, McMahon has said that he could write a Star Trek show that's only set on Earth.
Really?
And honestly, I would probably watch it.
That is
that's interesting.
A bold claim.
Why? That is very incendiary, is it not?
It is. How would you pull? How would you pull that off?
I don't know. I was just like reading up on some articles after the finale aired, and I remember he said that. He says people in Star Trek watch Star Trek, which I think is probably very true. I mean, like Mariner knows, like even Boimler, like they all know about like the big players that we care about, all the main characters from like Enterprise and things like that. They constantly reference them. Mariner's mentor was William Riker. Like how that's, of course she knows the Enterprise crew. She probably hangs out with like Geordi.
And that goes towards like another question that's existed out there for a long time in the sense of, okay, these characters are famous to us because we follow them every week and we watch all of their adventures. But are they famous to the rest of the Federation? Are they celebrities? Does the rest of the Federation in the universe follow their adventures? And is that kind of the baseline? And the Enterprise is really nothing special. And every ship out there in the fleet is running into some weird ass spatial anomaly or energy being every week and having similar adventures. And I feel like,
right. I've got
feel
to
like Lower Decks like really finally kind of painted those two tones with each other.
Yeah,
I've got to think that elsewhere in the fleet that there's all kinds of crazy shit happening with other crews, other ships, and to answer your question, would the characters and would the crews that we follow be just as well known in the Federation? I believe. To a degree, I would be hard pressed to say that the crew of the Enterprise, being the flagship of the Federation and Next Generation, would not be well known. But that's tough to say, because outside of that, we had the Enterprise D, and Deep Space Nine was also a very important strategic location. So it's tough to answer, because there was importance in those ships or that station. It's not like we're dealing with a ship that's not the flagship, is not really special per se, but has an extraordinary crew. And then would they be known throughout the Federation? Probably not. Would they be well known throughout Starfleet? Maybe. Who knows? But that is the thing that I think that there tends to be a loss of scale with Star Trek that Lower Decks was able to address. And I think that part is, Starfleet is a lot larger than we think. They've got to have the number of hundreds, dare I say thousands of ships in active duty.
Maybe.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, we don't know.
for sure.
Right. And so
I would say like in the several thousands.
Right. So you can't tell me that all of these ships don't experience any kind of adventures or peril or anything else, that the only ones getting that special attention are the hero ships.
Yeah, but the Enterprise is like the Enterprise. It's
Right.
the Enterprise. It's Enterprise. And like the Enterprise we know is the very first ship with like Archer. And that tradition carries through to continue to be the flagship. And, at the beginning of Picard, when he's getting the interview with that news lady, that sets up kind of like the where the show is at now and where it might go and what has happened. Like they set Picard up in that interview like as like captain of the Enterprise, and I think that like the captains on the ships are kind of viewed as like the cowboys a little bit. Like throughout the Federation, like they're out there, they're on the frontier, they're paving like the way, they're making those first contacts. And so I would say maybe not like every captain probably has notoriety, but Picard being on the Enterprise probably does. And I think that they make a name for themselves on the Enterprise. Otherwise, why would it be like such a desired posting?
Well, I definitely with our podcast with the Tempest, I definitely wanted to give the sense of, there are interesting things happening to other ships, and obviously ours being one of them. But this idea that there's something in like writing called the off-camera life, which is the idea of your characters don't just exist when you happen to be looking at them; they still have full lives, and they presumably when they walk off camera, at least within the story, they have some other life that they go to. Their life has a continuity to it that keeps going even when the camera is not pointed at them. And like, how do you write something, and how do you create a world that really has that sense to it? And that's something I'm really trying to do with the Tempest, as in, okay, this is not the Enterprise, it's a sister ship, it's in the same league, but it's over in this direction when the Enterprise is over there, and interesting things are happening on both sides. And I think Lower Decks succeeds at that, where a lot of the earlier Star Trek iterations didn't really. Like, it's the Enterprise finding the interesting thing every week. And just once I would have loved for it to be a different starship that finds the crazy thing or does the crazy thing, but then doesn't need the Enterprise to rescue them. The Enterprise is involved some other way, other than, well, the Enterprise has to come to the rescue, which is really the only time we ever see other ships, is when the Enterprise is rescuing.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think it would be really funny if Lower Decks season 2 mocked the sort of, why do the hero ships always get the great missions, by saying something along the lines of, oh, did you guys hear the Copernicus saved Earth 3 times last week?
Yeah.
Just 3 times? Wow. And there's like a scoreboard somewhere that has like all the times that some other ship has saved Earth or Vulcan or Romulus or the timeline or repelled extra dimensional robots from another galaxy or something.
There's a board in the break room at Starfleet headquarters that has Starship of the Week, and they're just little notches for how many times each ship is.
It's like a bingo card. The admirals have a bingo card as to, and they're running bets as to which ship or crew is going to do the thing more often. That would be great, and because I think that's really what's happening. And that's what I think what I like most about Lower Decks is that these people have a life outside of duty hours. It's not just show up for your job, and then when your shift is over, go sit in your quarters for the rest of the day. The rest
until
of
the next episode starts. Right.
Sit in your quarters till when the next episode happens.
They're making mistakes. It's not just things happening to them. Like, they're actually having an effect on the world. with via their actions.
And they're pursuing different things within their life, like any human being would. So their career is one of them. They're all focused to some degree on their career and advancing in the way that they want to. But then they also still have these other aspects of their personality in life of, trying to make it to this, concert or performance in the lounge or,
choo-choo dance.
Yeah.
Well, and you could really liken Rutherford to that grease monkey kid in your mechanical class who's just trying to put together the hot rod, because that was his baby, and he was always like tinkering with it in his off hours, to the point where he adds like freaking hull blasting phaser rifles to it, and
spoilers and that, put the spoilers on the back that make it go faster.
Did we say spoiler alert yet? No.
Can we talk about each of the characters, each of our lower deckers?
Sure. Yeah, where do you want to start?
So I want to start with Mariner, of course, because I want to talk about my theory. So in episode 2, Envoys, Mariner and Boimler are waiting to pick up the Klingon General Corin, and she's fallen asleep in the passenger seat, and she's dreaming, and she says, she's sleep talking, and she says, "Buried alive, marooned for eternity, moons of Nibia," which are all like references to Khan, who's an augment. And this kind of like got the wheels turning that, wow, Mariner can do all of these things that all these other people can't, like I think the best piece of evidence to this point is that she is an augment, is that during the terraforming episode with the orange goo, she can like smell the humidity difference or sense the humidity difference, like with her senses, and she can like tell that things are changing around her. And also like she's been promoted and demoted several times. So in my head, I'm thinking, well, maybe she got promoted and then like the secret got out. Maybe her like CO found out about it. And so that's why her mom is also posted on supposedly like the worst ship on Starfleet, because she probably with her kid.
She's an augment and she knows it, and that's why she's constantly trying to avoid any kind of command or notoriety, right? She wants to stay in the background because otherwise her it puts the revelation of her secret at greater risk if she comes to the forefront as a hero, like we would expect a character in a Star Trek show to do. That's interesting.
Further lending support to your theory, Watney. In that very same episode, Envoys, she outdrinks the Klingon.
Yes.
On that shuttle. She barely shows any signs of needing rest in the buffering episode, where everybody else has the dark circles under their eyes, and she's just like, "Hey, what do I do?" She seems to have an issue with authority, which if you had some augmented DNA, they were said to have issues with authority in some of the books.
She punches through a rock wall with like her hand.
But you've never done that? Hey, I could do that. I could go do that right now.
Why don't you? Go on.
Psych.
Calling Dwayne Johnson, our host, wants to punch a hole through you.
Yeah.
I just think that there's definitely some pretty compelling evidence that there's more to Mariner than meets the eye. And there was something in my head about that I wanted to talk about, and now I forgot.
Well, while you're thinking of that, I liked the augment theory for a time, but it didn't really catch on with me, because the thing about what she was saying when she was sleep talking in the shuttle, I took that as nothing more than a fourth wall or meta reference meant for us, in that it wasn't some kind of tie or bind to her being an augment, because how would there be? Those were things that Khan said that were not part of any log or anything that were recorded, it would not have been known, for someone to have even gotten that line from him, even during the Genesis incident. The other thing with being able to outdrink a Klingon, okay, well, I mean, that's just very high alcohol tolerance, perhaps. Being able to smell changing humidity. I can tell you I have done and been around people that could smell or hear things that others could not.
Lonnie's giving it some serious side eye.
Yeah, I know.
Big J, at what point are you gonna reason away every piece of evidence? There's a forest for the trees situation going on here.
Right. I know.
Sure. The part with the Khan quote was so difficult to understand because there was other things going on in the scene. I watch it once without subtitles, and then I watch it again with subtitles. And I only caught that because there were subtitles on.
Right.
So to make it like a nugget, as in it's almost like a clue to me rather than like an homage or like a fan service. It's like a clue in my head. I mean, obviously I'm going to ardently defend my own theory, but no, I mean, I can see both sides, and it would be really cool if it was a thing, but otherwise because at the beginning there was a lot of Mariners and Mary Sue, and I'm like, well, what if she's actually just projecting that she's shitty and faking because she's an augment and she knows it and her mom knows it, and that's why they don't talk about their relationship as mom and daughter. That's separated because it's one big secret.
I'm just saying that I am concerned with that pitfall of, if you're smart or you're quick on your feet in Starfleet, that you're suspected of being an augment. To me, that's the bar. That I didn't really see any situation she came up with, and I know that there were some things you quoted as, well, she had this idea or this strategy right away. That can just be someone who's smart. You can be smart without being an augment. You can just be that kind of person that is constantly thinking of the next two steps ahead, or the contingency plan of something. So, the more I thought about that, I thought, I don't know. It felt like the augment theory was, I don't want to say far-fetched. It just seemed like we were taking someone that could very well have just been a very smart person, but acts like a slacker because they don't want the responsibility. That's just that person. Doesn't mean that they're trying to necessarily hide a big secret like that.
Jay, I think that last point you made, to me, that might be the most valid point. Instead of trying to explain away the evidence by going and saying, if Mariner's an augment, it kind of can take away from Mariner just being a regular human being who has some very, very good insights into the way starships and crazy phenomena that starships encounter work. And just being a regular human is okay enough. I'm not saying I buy into that she's not an augment. I like to play with that augment theory because I'm looking forward in every episode now. Mm-hmm. But if I were going to be swayed the other direction, coming back and saying Star Trek is about regular people in crazy circumstances, that is a good argument for Mariner being a regular human.
Right.
Do we not think Boimler is like a regular human?
Oh, Boimler's been an augment from day one. Purple hair.
He is definitely
there was another theory that I read out there that I liked, although I think that there's actually less evidence for this one than your augment one. But the theory goes that Mariner actually grew up on the Enterprise, so she was one of the kids on the Enterprise D during Next Generation.
What?
And was like completely, or some similar situation, maybe not necessarily the Enterprise itself, but and was so like dramatically traumatized by the near death scenarios that the Enterprise would get into every week, that, you know, that's why she has this she rejects, she's trying to reject everything that's is right and proper about her parents and Starfleet in general and the Federation way. And it also gives an in-universe explanation of why she makes all of these what are really fourth wall references to specifically the Starfleet officers that we are so familiar with, because the show focused on them, right? So the reason she's always referencing TNG and Picard and Riker specifically is because that's her, you know, her specific childhood was centered around them because of kids on the Enterprise D. So
interesting.
I kind of like that, because like I said, I don't think there's as much evidence as for the Augment one, but I like that because it goes back towards what we were talking about before with the whole, you know, taking the premise one step further to see like the real horror of it, of, you know, oh crap, Worf ate a guy, and there's probably should be some ramifications for that. And also, and you know, this has been discussed plenty of times before, but like the Enterprise D almost blows up every week, and there are a whole bunch of kids on board,
right,
who like have to face their own mortality through the entirety of their childhood on a weekly basis. And like, what would it be like to be a child in that situation? And
so what you're saying is we need to bring Brian Bonsall back to be Alexander again. Alexander, security officer on the Cerritos for lower decks.
What's
season.
I mean, there's even the episode where where Rutherford is like, I guess we should keep talking about the lower decks crew, but we'll talk about Rutherford, I guess. He like job hops a little bit, and then when he gets to like the command job with Ransom, the entire holodeck simulation is like about, well, he ends up murdering like a bunch of kids in the holodeck simulation. It's like,
they all got ejected into space.
It's like it's the joke. Like the show's very self-aware about that.
Well,
it's making a joke out of that, like facing the horror aspect.
Yeah, exactly what you just said.
The dramatic Star Trek has never really taken the time to face.
Let me throw a dark question.
We lost the whole kindergarten. We lost the high school. We lost the middle school. We lost the K through 12.
Right. Now let me throw this out to you. This is a very dark question, but are we to assume that through the 7-year service history of the Enterprise D, that not one minor perished or lost their life in any incident during that time?
No, I wouldn't assume that at all.
Yes, that's correct.
But why would you assume that?
I don't assume that.
Okay, so
at all.
I don't assume
it's safe to say that
I would say it's possible, not necessarily guaranteed, but possible.
I mean, we have seen kids in danger a lot.
Yes.
Brothers. The episode where Alexander tried to save the zoo creature and it was on fire. Kids have been in peril in Star Trek.
The classroom caught on fire somehow.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's even that episode in I think it's the first season, where the planet can't have children anymore, so
they steal
all
them.
of the Enterprise's children.
Exactly.
They steal them all.
Exactly.
That episode was when the bow breaks. They kidnap some kids.
Yeah.
Now that's a question that McMahon would want to answer. It's like, what happened to one of those kids if they had stayed in Starfleet? That'd be a great question to ask.
Exactly.
I'm just saying that.
On my recent rewatch of the bow breaks, there's this part that I had completely forgotten existed, but Wesley teaches all of the other kids how to do a hunger strike, and the kids go on a hunger strike.
Yes.
Like, holy crap, that is heavy stuff to subject on. I think the littlest kid is like 4 years old or something.
Oh, they're little.
Some very little kids.
Yeah, they're little.
There's some little kids in that group, and like, imagine being in a situation where somebody told you, okay, we have to do a hunger strike now to protest what is happening to us.
And even as late
as a 4-year-old,
as season 7's Firstborn, where time traveling Alexander comes back to convince young Alexander to be a warrior. At the very beginning, there's a setup hit on Worf, and Alexander's there. and
yeah.
Worf shows up to defend Alexander, but he had to grow up real quick. Plus, by the time he's like 8, he's fighting in the Dominion War because Klingons age quickly.
Yeah. Well, one thing that was definitely on purpose in the relationship between Worf and Alexander is that Worf was a terrible parent. And like, if you actually watch it, like if you watch it all in a big rewatch of both TNG and Deep Space Nine, you can see it, and you can see that it's the intent of the writing and it's the way Michael Dorn is acting it and playing it, where the whole point, and the writers were consciously making it this way, that Worf is just a terrible father at every point of the opportunity that he has.
He's the reluctant and resentful father.
Yeah.
And I think it's because he was really in love with Kalar. But this isn't a TNG show. This is a Lower Decks show. We were talking about Rutherford.
Sure.
True.
Yeah, we could talk about him. Sam, honestly, like I didn't see a whole lot of development for Sam.
No, he stayed to me, it seemed like he stayed mostly the same just throughout the season. Not much of a character arc.
Yeah, and then they did the whole Voyager thing where they just completely like wiped everything that happened at the end, and they pulled out all of his memory.
Well,
except he still said okie dokie. That's part of him.
I think that's like pre-implant, right?
I was thinking, like, what if? Because at the beginning of the series, Rutherford is still adjusting to the implant, which makes us think like maybe his accident was kind of recent. But what if it's a new implant and it reset his memories, and we don't know how many loops Rutherford's been through where he's done stuff and forgotten and gotten an upgrade or a new implant.
How many different versions of Rutherford has existed since that implant, since he got the implant in the first place?
Right.
Like, does it just, like, how often does it break or need to be upgraded or whatever that might cause that glitch? And so how many times has he lost his memory and had to start over? That's an interesting idea.
And there's no way to save the memory. I mean, come on, back it up with a flash drive or something. But
I
kind of agree with Watney.
I mean, yeah, like I think from a development standpoint, like he was kind of like, he got attached to Tendi, and then he makes Badgie,
fixes up the shuttle.
He just makes like a best friend, really. I wonder if he's gonna have to get like a new one.
It would be cool.
Well,
probably.
Right. He's definitely going to get a new one because, well, the one he had was destroyed with the ship that Badgie self-destructed. And the way I took it was that with whatever that was that happened to Rutherford that prompted the need for that implant, that he would always need that. But I mean, I don't know that maybe I missed that because he had half his face bandaged like Darkman, and he seemed to be just fine. I'm missing the necessity of the of the implant. Maybe I missed it.
Maybe we'll find out next season.
We didn't learn a lot about him, honestly. Like, okay. I think the most interesting episode with him in it was Terminal Provocations. No.
Terminal Edicts.
Veritas.
Right.
Veritas. Where it's the like retro, it's like the Canterbury Tales, like you're telling the story through the experiences and the testimony of other people, and like you get the whole story.
You get the flashbacks.
It was the trial. Yeah. And I think Rutherford's was my favorite in that episode because it was just like, you turn him off, you turn him back on, you turn him off. And you just like, you can't even keep up. I love it. They didn't hold your hand. They just gave it to you and we're like, take it. Like, it was great.
Yeah.
There was no spoon feeding going on. It was wonderful. And I think that's like where we kind of saw him a lot there. I don't know. I don't really have a whole lot to say about him. I wish that we learn more. We know that he really likes his boss.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Billups, which we could talk a lot about Billups based on the last few episodes. That poor man, what's he going through?
To cap off on Rutherford just real quick, McMahon said that one of the plot points that season 2 is going to seek to address is where is Rutherford now that his implant has been removed. So I feel like we're going to get some backstory for Rutherford. And this first season really was focusing on the dynamic between Mariner and Boimler.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, I want to see where they're going to go with that. And then Tendi, Devana Tendi. I mean, would Watney? She was your favorite. I mean, why don't you? You always talk about it. You said
GIF
she
that,
was. Yes.
Capture that, and GIF it. That's the excuse you.
You did. Like when this was starting, you always had compliments for Devana. And I thought she was one of your, or at least.
Let's be super. Let me just be explicitly clear. My favorite will always be Deanna Troi.
Right. Well, no,
but from Lower Decks.
Lower Decks.
In Lower Decks, my favorite's Mariner.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, then never mind. I won't ask you about
Tendi.
Tendi.
Felt a lot to me like Rutherford.
You can ask me about Tendi just because she's not my favorite. Mariner went through a lot more. We got to see a lot more of her journey through this season, but Tendi.
That's the thing I forgot.
What is it?
The whole Mariner wanted to be Mariner was skewing the upper decks because she wanted to be in a position where she could be the one who gets ordered to her death. If you're in the upper decks, you have to be the one that says, Ensign so-and-so, go do the thing. If you're a commander, if you're a captain. But we actually saw it happen in Lower Decks. In the Crisis Point, the hologram of Mariner sacrificed herself for the ship and the crew. And that hologram, according to Brad Boimler, was based on everybody's personal logs, an amalgamation, a real person.
Yes.
And so Mariner literally, if we just accept that as true, Mariner would literally give her life for the rest of her crew. And she shows up, she kicks Invicta's ass, she beams her mom to safety, then she blows up the ship. So that's fully
the trippy.
Why does she have a death wish?
Shit,
it's not a death wish; it's a hero wish.
Okay,
could be both.
That blazing glory.
I think it's definitely at least death wish.
She wants to die.
Maybe it's a sort of a mix of Yossarian from Catch-22 mixed with your typical Star Trek character, in the sense she's still good. She still has the capabilities of being a hero, but Yossarian in Catch-22, she acknowledges just how absurd and crazy all of this stuff is, and really doesn't want to be, have to give up her life to save the ship or save her crew or whatever. She's genre savvy enough to be aware of that ahead of time. If I go that route, I'm probably going to end up in that kind of a situation. And I really don't want to be in that kind of situation. So I'm going to engineer my situation so I don't ever end up in that predicament.
It's not every day you get your ass kicked by a holographic version of yourself.
Yeah.
Right. No, it's not. That would be, I think, a little off-putting. That would be very uncomfortable.
So yeah, I didn't mean to totally divert us back to Mariner again.
No, I'm so glad we got to hear your thought, because that's so true. She got a lot of focus in this season, and so there is a lot to unpack, and I'm gonna recall things as we talk about the other characters. She even says in the very first couple of scenes in the premiere, she says yeah, I got a lot of baggage, I'm mysterious or something. So we definitely saw that. That was another thing that made me think that she's an augment, because that's in retrospect, yeah, shit, she fucking does. If she's an augment, she definitely does. Not that she can help it, but I think that's we see her mom being overbearing as they're trying to save the Cerritos from the terraforming goo. and she's just like kind of like a hover parent. She's like a
Helicopter parenting.
What's it called? Helicopter parent. Yeah.
Mhm.
A shuttlecraft parent.
And it
Shuttlecraft
reminded me
A shuttlecraft parent.
that aspect of Carol's like sort of helicopter parent, that reminded me of that scene in Incredibles where at the end they accept that Dash is going to be fast, and so he's trying out for track, and they're like, no, faster, no, slow down. You don't want to like
Not
throw
too
it
fast,
up.
not too fast.
Right, and
Right.
if you're a parent of someone
Dad's like,
who's
close
an
second,
augment,
close
and
second.
you love them, and you know that their abilities can exceed what everybody else's abilities are do,
Mhm.
you're going to end up micromanaging that kid,
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
and that would have
Big
been
J,
hard
you
on
said
Mary.
yes, as in you agree with the augment theory.
I said yes, as in I hear you speaking.
I
acknowledge that you are there.
God.
I like to be the middle here because
You're always the
can-
middle.
I am the middle, but I can firmly see that she's an augment, and I can also see that point that Jay made about making her an augment takes away from her being a regular human with exceptional ability. And so, if the show chose to go either way with that, I'd be fine with that. I would want to be at the celebration party where Watney's like, she's a fucking augment, and I told you.
Mhm.
I would want to be at that party.
Pop the champagne.
But
Yeah,
I mean,
if that happened, I would be happy for you as well. I just, and like I said before,
Thanks, guys.
I see the evidence. I see that it's just I caution the pitfall of going back and saying, well, Wesley Crusher was an augment because he was just as smart and intelligent. And
Do you think Wesley Crusher can smell the difference in humidity? Do you think Wesley Crusher can take a rock and bust down an entire wall of rocks?
Just to be clear, Wesley Crusher did become an augment at the end of his journey. He's off traveling with a traveler now. He's totally out there.
But then he still comes back for
a wedding?
for Riker and Troy's wedding for some reason.
He has like 2 seconds of footage that didn't get cut.
Right.
I mean, we'll see what happens. I just think it's interesting. Like I know that this show leaves nuggets. We know that this show is smart. We know the writers are huge Trek nerds. There's multiple references that she makes to Khan.
well,
She's kind of a Khan
I will certainly
fanboy.
eat humble pie if you end up being right.
Well, I like to be realistic, and I think my theory is realistic. So
Okay.
I'm aboard this train.
I'm on
aboard
one
this
side,
train.
Watney's on the other, and Dag's in the middle. He's like the bologna in the Beyond Trek
I
sandwich.
feel like you're just being contrarian.
Me?
Did Jay?
Contrarian.
Oh,
Contrarian? Is that the right word?
yeah.
Contrarian.
Maybe
Okay, close. That was it.
I don't know. Maybe I am.
Contrarian.
I want you to be right. I want you to be right. I'm just.
Well,
I'm
I want
just
you to
saying.
be right.
No, I want you to be right.
No, I want you to be right. Okay. So let's talk about Tendi, please.
The one
I
you
feel
don't
a lot
like.
like Tendi is a lot like Rutherford. She was wholesome and positive
Yes.
and always looking on the bright side the whole time, right up until she told Peanut Hamper that she had a crappy name.
Right. She
Yeah.
was the wholesome one, the nice wholesome one. She was the one you called her the cinnamon bun.
Cinnamon roll.
Oh, cinnamon roll.
And they
Yeah.
canonized cinnamon roll in the show.
Who did Tendi called somebody a cinnamon roll? Who was it?
This is
It was
trivia I
Tendi.
don't have the
Tendi
answer
called
to.
someone
No,
else
you're
a cinnamon
right.
roll, didn't
You're
she?
totally right. Oh, wait, the dog.
The dog.
What's
the
the dog? Oh.
Just dog.
Dog.
The dog.
The psycho dog.
Yeah.
Flying psycho
the
dog.
dog's name was
Flying
the dog.
Thing dog.
Yeah.
But so Tendi, like anytime she encountered somebody, she was always like, "You're a cool person. You're totally valid the way you are. This is going to be great." Any hardship she faced, she always saw the bright side of. When Rutherford lost his memory, she was like, "We get to be best friends all over again." And she made the dog and had no problem with the dog like flying away and talking. And the dog was
She
like,
doesn't
"I
know
just
how a
didn't want
dog's supposed to
disappoint you."
be. Yeah.
And
Wouldn't that
You
just
know,
be nice to be around someone that nice and wholesome all the time?
Mhm.
I think it could get really annoying sometimes, but it definitely would take a kind of person to be like, "Man, you're always on the positive side of things. Bad stuff happens and you're always looking for the best in things."
But
And I think that's a good lesson.
but she'll kick some Romulan asses and
Hell yeah,
like
she
Watcher
will.
6. So
That's because they said they hated Remans.
also she is a great medical officer.
Oh yeah.
So we think. I don't think we've seen her a whole lot in action.
Oh, and like that time that she helped O'Connor, like, we're best friends. We were both trying really too hard to be liked, and that's amazing. We have that in common. And oh, you're gonna ascend. Awesome.
Right, but her need to be liked would never extend to making someone else the fall of like the like, you know how he basically set her up. He's the guy, the Ascension guy, basically made Tendi his foil to get out of ascending because he was like trying to just get out of the whole situation. She would never do that.
No.
And the sad thing
His
is,
was like a narcissism. Hers is like, I am like, just
yeah. I think that she understood his vulnerability in that moment. Every one of us here would probably be pissed off. He'd be like, "You what me?" But Tendi was very much like, she saw through that and she's like, oh, you were really just trying to be liked by everybody like I try to be liked by everybody. And the way that you did it wasn't super the best. And again, at the end of that episode, she's like smacking Rutherford around going, who doesn't like me? So, you know, maybe she didn't really learn her lesson the best way, but, you know, that doesn't come back.
Well, he was accepted in that moment by her as his true self, Ascension guy.
Yeah.
Like she's the only one at this point in time that knows how much of a shitty person that I am for doing this, like, to her, and she accepted me anyway. So I'm gonna risk my life for her and die for her, and then he'll ascend.
The thing that I worry about with Tendi going forward with her career is that unless she changes, she's going to be Picard in Tapestry. She's going to be a 30-year lieutenant that doesn't really advance in her career, plays it safe, nice to everyone, doesn't get herself in a situation where someone may not like her orders. I think that her advancement is going to be short-lived because we've seen those dark parts of Starfleet. And if you want to excel in rank, once you start hitting lieutenant commander, and certainly captain, you start getting into that realm where you're making life and death decisions, not only for yourself, but for others. And I don't see her in her current state now. I don't see her as the kind of person that's going to get to that level. She's going to hit junior grade lieutenant, maybe lieutenant, and it's going to stop there unless she changes, because she is not able to be at that rank that would hold really any responsibility, and
do
especially
we think
not
she wants to do that.
That she wants to advance, or that she'd be fine, like, you know, getting that one promotion to junior grade lieutenant, maybe full lieutenant, and just stop.
I kind of see like both. I see it both ways for her. Like, if there's a lot of things about Tendi that made me think that she wants to be a medical officer because she cares about other people. Not necessarily, it's like she's getting into medicine to help others, not to advance through the ranks. You can want to do both, and that's okay. Right. But there's also the moment where her and Sam are fighting over like the T-88 tricorder, and she's like envisioning herself as like the queen of sickbay. Yep. And so I think that is at least a little bit of an ambition to like moment for her. Like, maybe she just wants to really be admired and liked, but maybe doesn't want the responsibility of being like Crusher later in her career, who commanded like a ship. That's very possible. You've got to have that desire, and you're right. Maybe she doesn't, because I know, I don't know about you guys, but I know that I have had jobs where I saw what that next step up was and didn't want to have anything to do with it whatsoever. So like you get to that certain point where, okay, once I'm there, I'll stay there 20, 30 years till I retire, because there's just what's above me is hell. And I don't need that. It takes a certain person to want
that kind of drive to do that. And some get to a certain spot and they're comfortable. Like, I'm good. I don't have to run the company. I'm okay being a cog in the wheel.
Yeah.
And with Tendi,
Yeah,
right.
that's
Yep. Go ahead.
That's something else like that is really great about Lower Decks. It goes again with the Enterprise. We've only ever seen the best of the best with the biggest ambition of being on the best ship and being in the center chair of the best ship and
right.
all of that, right? But presumably there are thousands of people in Starfleet, and if not just people on Earth and everywhere else, that don't have necessarily any ambition to do anything on that scale. That they have whatever normal boring life they have, and they're perfectly fine with it, the same way that exists in real life, where you have people who decide they want to be the presidents when they're 6 years old, and they, their whole life is geared towards that.
Mm-hmm.
And you have people who are like, yeah, I'm just going to work at this paper company and I'm okay with that because that's what I'm happy with.
Mm-hmm.
Like both things are valid, right? Both identities are valid, but we've never really seen the latter depicted in Star Trek because it never really worked within the context of the show before. Mm-hmm. And with Lower Decks, we're finally kind of seeing like, yes, here are, like we were talking about before, here are the people who, some of them, two of them want to be one of them definitely wants to be the Riker, Picard, Kirk in the center chair. The other one is actively trying not to do that. And at least so far, the other two, Rutherford and Tendi, don't seem to have a pull in either direction. They're just,
they're just happy to be there.
They're happy to be there. I'm just really jazzed about being on the show.
I'm just really jazzed about being on the show, man.
Right?
You have a last name.
Do I?
Yeah.
Do we have to call out the Galaxy Quest reference for the audience?
No, they get it. They have to. It's a Star Trek show. So
it is.
I think when I think about departments in Trek and who's the most ambitious, what department is going to have the most ambitious people? Medical is like the last.
Right. Command is
medical is last. Then you probably have like science and engineering, probably science, then engineering. And then you have tactical operations command, and those are going to be your like accelerated acceleration, because they need a lot more, like, I don't know, I feel like if you're an engineer, you're like very honed in on your specific job. It's not like you need a breadth of like experience in real life. Like you can just physics, the laws of the universe, and you can make it work.
You know who you know who this whole conversation makes me think of? Chief O'Brien.
I was just about to say.
Yep. Yeah. He never pursued. Hell, he was not even. He was non-com. He's non-commissioned officer. He wasn't even enlisted in Starfleet, much less chasing a promotion. He had his thing. That was it. He was happy doing it.
I have this whole theory built around why O'Brien is a chief petty officer, and he's like the only non-com that we see in Star Trek, which is like, okay, so Roddenberry originally had this idea that there was no enlisted, there was only officers, and obviously that hasn't panned out in later iterations because we've absolutely seen enlisted people like Crewman Tarsus and O'Brien himself, right? I have this theory that when it's peacetime, there are very few enlisted people in Starfleet. Like it's a small fleet with really just officers from Starfleet Academy and maybe a couple other places exploring, right? But if and when Starfleet kind of has to go into war mobilization mode, it will then train up thousands of people, not send them to the academy for 4 years, but give them a couple months of training that they need to operate a starship. And those people are crew members. Those are enlisted. When the war ends, most of them leave. Maybe a few go, okay, actually, I like this. I'm going to stick around. And for those, the natural progression is to then become an officer at some point. So that in order to be enlisted and stay enlisted over a period of time in Starfleet, you have to actively want to stay enlisted, right? So like we know O'Brien fought in the Cardassian War. So the idea is that he enlisted as part of the Cardassian War. The war ended, but he was like, I still like this. I still like this basic job, so I'm going to stick around. But at that point, he had to make an active choice to not become an officer. Otherwise, he would have become an officer. And so that's why there are so few like chief petty officers and petty officers, because most of the time, if you're enlisted, you're going to end up as an officer anyway, which is not really how it works in the modern day military. Some enlisted become officers, but it's not automatic.
I like that.
So
I'm on board.
Yeah. So that's my basic idea, is that they enlisted a whole bunch of people for the Cardassian War. O'Brien was one of them. Most of them left when the war was done, but O'Brien stayed. But O'Brien was like, no, I don't want to command a starship. I don't want to be in charge of, an engineering department and 30 people. I just want to sit at the transporter pad and play with the transporter all day. Like, that's all I really want to do. And because he really was like anti-ambitious in that sense, at some point he would have had, the option to become an officer, and he actively chose not to. So that's my theory.
How does Harry Kim fit into this? I want to know.
Please actually don't. The show's just gonna go this way.
Well, it actually in this theory, it puts an extra like notch in Harry Kim's butt monkey status, because in peacetime Starfleet, the ensign that just graduated from the academy is like the low person on the totem pole, right? Like they're the bottom of the ladder. But during wartime, there are more enlisted people around. So that ensign would be more like a modern day naval ensign, where sure, they just graduated from college 6 months ago, but they still have, they're still in charge of half a dozen or more other human beings. So like, that's what Starfleet is more like in wartime. So in that situation, if Voyager had just gotten sent to the Delta Quadrant a little bit later, it would have been mobilized for the Dominion War, and Harry Kim would have actually had some authority over anybody. Like, there would have been enlisted people that he would have had authority over. But Voyager got pulled into the Delta Quadrant before that could happen. So like, he spent 7 years not in charge of anything. And if they'd just been in the Alpha Quadrant just that much longer, he would have actually had some authority even as an ensign.
Right.
So
right.
Yeah, that's my long convoluted theory. The other point that goes to it is that there's only 2 petty officers that we've seen explicitly seen or mentioned in Star Trek, in Next Generation, at least in the Next Generation era, which is O'Brien and then Worf's foster dad, Sergei Rozhenko. And when he shows up when his parents show up to visit him, Sergei Rozhenko makes a comment to O'Brien about like, yeah, I was a petty officer too. I never wanted to be an officer. I wanted to work for a living, which is an old joke about officers in the military. But like he also expresses an explicit preference against being an officer. So he maybe like did the same thing 20 years earlier.
Yes.
And those are the only 2 non-comm officers we have ever seen in the TNG era of Star Trek.
But we know they're out there.
Yeah.
But
we
they're
didn't
out there.
see any in lower decks, did we?
What was that, Wadi?
I don't think so.
We didn't see any in lower decks.
No, not in lower decks. No.
Very interesting.
So good.
Anyway, sorry, that was a bit of a tangent.
No, that was that was fine. I mean, it was good character arcs for.
It's always like a joke, like about O'Brien. So it's nice to get a little bit of like some meat behind the bite.
I mean, he is the most important person in the Federation.
Right.
Oh yeah, in the far future.
Which brings me to our segue to Brad Boimler.
Oh, we didn't talk about Boimler.
Boimler probably changes. Would you say the most?
I would say Boimler goes from being a stickler to understanding what we talked about in episode 2, where he is lamenting how he is all book learned and she is all wisdom. And because she has some experience on him, he's ready to throw his career away, like ultra perfectionism in his head. I'm Starfleet. I'm supposed to be the best. Somebody is better than me. I'm not the best. I suck. And that's, obviously we've all had that experience.
By the book.
It's the difference between street smart and book smart.
Right.
Yeah.
And he gets in gear. He figures it out. And you see that in this last episode where he takes off his uniform top and starts handing out pencils and crayons with Mariner.
Yeah, he is not on the Cerritos when already. He arrives in the premiere, doesn't he? Like he's the new guy. Yeah. So we do see a significant amount of change, I think, in him. Dad kind of nailed it. Like he absolutely goes from book smart, where Mariner's forcing him into a situation with that Ferengi and envoys, to say, well, by the book, you're a Ferengi, so this doesn't make sense. Okay, but let's not go by the book. Why does it not make sense? What's the actual key? What is like the pin in this plan?
Right. You can't always go by the book, Savick.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so very much so, like that person. And then throughout, I think, he's still bookish, but he's got like some cool experience under his belt and some fun stories, and most importantly, some really good friends.
Well, look at that lesson. It really is, to me, it kind of feels like the same parallel between Boimler being by the book and Mariner having street smarts, Savick being by the book and Kirk having street smarts. Because Savick going by anyone, not just Savick from Star Trek 2, anyone going by the book, that's only going to get you so far. If you don't have at least some street smarts, you're going to be in some deep shit, and that's what's going to happen. And I really think that that's something that she is trying to prepare him for, is that you are not going to make it going off of book smarts. Your career is not going to advance. If anything, you'll get yourself killed. Is what's going to happen.
Yeah, I definitely think that's what the writers are trying to do. They're trying to set up that juxtaposition between the book smart and the street smarts approaches, and say that neither one of them, in their pure form, will be successful. You have to blend. Just like you have to blend logic and emotion. You have to, you can't all logical and you can't be all emotional. You have to be the right blend of it. And they're just trying to do the same thing in terms of the book smart, street smart dichotomy. Yeah. And so Mariner has definitely pulled Boimler, towards the street smart a little bit. And I think I would have to do a rewatch, but I would say that Boimler has pulled her more towards the book smart, or at least in the sense of like, hey, sometimes the regulations are there for a reason and they are a good idea. Like, don't just rebel against the regulations for the sake of being a rebel. That's not going to get you anywhere either. And really like fusing those ideas of like, this is what you're doing good. Like, this is the reason why we're out here, is to help people, to explore whatever. And here is how we do it, which is maybe by this regulation this time, but not by that regulation the next time, because it's the right way this time, but it's not the right way the other time. And, hopefully, the idea being that there's a fusion there, which one thing about Wrath of Khan is that Kirk makes this, presents this face of like, oh, I don't even know the regulations. And, she quotes one about always having an armed escort, and he goes, there's no such regulation. And she just has a look where she's like, yeah, come on. And he's like, all right, fine. But Kirk obviously knows all of the regulations because he uses one to communicate with Spock. And that's how, they engineer their way off of the planetoid.
Yes.
So it's like this idea, like, and I feel like Mariner is a similar thing where like Mariner knows all the regulations. She knows how to do a good job. She knows what it takes to be a quote unquote good officer. but she doesn't let that get in the way of her doing what she feels like is the right thing in any given situation. And she's trying to pull Boimler to a proper fusion of that. And he's intentionally or not pulling her towards the, like, you know, well, you break the rules when there's a reason to break the rules. When you're actually like, when you're trying to help somebody, you're not just breaking the rules just because you think that's who you are and what you have to do.
Well, they really complement each other because they were both on these two extremes. And I really felt like through the course of the season that they kind of helped pull each other a little closer to the center, or at least a little closer than they were. They were both at extreme ends there. And when it comes to the regulations, that's Mariner's philosophy is, yes, I know the regulations, but I will not hesitate to break them if the situation calls for it. If the outcome is we need to do this thing and we can get there following regulations, great. If we have to break them to get there, that's what we're going to do also, which is very much reminds me of Captain Sisko in A Pale Moonlight. He had to, there was this goal. He had to get the Romulans in the war. Can you get them in there being completely honest and above board? Great. If not, you can't. Well, then what do you have to do to get them there? And that was a very, very telling example of there are going to be times, and I think this was the lesson that Mariner was trying to teach Boimler all season, is that there will be times that to get from point A to point B, to get to point B, you may not be able to get there following regulations and going by the book. But if you have to get to point B no matter what, and you have to break rules to get there, depending on the situation, that's probably what you have to do. And he needs to learn
and not to forget, you know, not to forget the reason of why you're doing whatever you're doing, not to forget what is worthwhile and valuable about point B in the first place, right? So you're not just following the regulations because you're some kind of, you know, by the book automaton. Mm-hmm. Your goal is separate from how you get to the goal, and you keep the actual goal in mind, and you don't end up just you know going through the motions and forgetting like why you got into this in the first place.
Yeah.
Which
kind of like
a thing that happens to a lot of people.
It's like how Kirk has like Bones and Spock on his shoulder. He's the middle ground in both of their personalities. And I think that the concept of like, oh, logic is better than emotion, you should not be emotional. No, you can have both. You should celebrate both and use both.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I absolutely agree. So, Dag, any thoughts?
He's in deep thought. I can tell the wheels are turning.
I'm just absorbing and reflecting in my own head, and when I have a coherent string of words, I'll find a place to say that.
Okay.
It'll happen after we're done recording.
Favorite parts of season 1. What were your guys' favorite parts?
Oh, can I go first?
Yeah, go ahead.
It was definitely the Titan kicking ass in the season finale. Mm-hmm. That was by far. I watched that part 4 or 5 times. It was just that was it for me. That was my favorite.
God, it's hard to compare.
Oh yeah,
like anything to that. It's another like surprise. It's the Rikers. Like that's just like my favorite thing. I hope they keep doing that. Mm-hmm. So,
I mean, it's such the obvious answer, but it is. It's like. There's a lot of great moments, but there's, in terms of just building to something and then like the payoff, that was a great payoff. And I don't know if this was intentional on their part, but notice how like both the finale of Lower Decks and the finale of Picard both have Riker swooping in to save the day on a starship.
Yep.
And how it doesn't really work in Picard, but it really, really works in Lower Decks. And so why is that different? I think is an interesting comparison to look into. But I do love the my favorite style of joke is the one that takes something absurd and just really yanks it back into the real world through some really mundane aspects. So like my favorite joke in Star Trek is in Star Trek 6, where Scotty says, I bet the daughter killed her father. She didn't shed one bloody tear when he died. And Spock just totally level with no hesitation goes, well, Klingons don't have tear ducts, so that's not really evidence. Like that sort of twist on stuff is
Right.
is my favorite kind of humor. And in the first episode with the giants, gooey spider thing, where it's like it's not actually eating him, it's not doing the typical monster movie thing. It's just kind of doing this thing that's not dangerous but is gross. But he's gonna be fine.
Just sucking on him.
Yeah, like that was the moment where in the first episode I was like, this show might have some legs to it. Like the show might have some real meat on its bones. So yeah.
Dag, your favorite moment?
My favorite moment, honestly, we talked about Veritas a lot, and I had my own personal theory that Veritas is a love letter to the fans, where the writers put a plot together where our lower deckers represent the diehard fans and the antagonist represents the online trolls that are always luring the fans into proving that Star Trek is worth watching these days. The heroes who are, suspended in the beam, the senior staff, those are the writers. And just the way that, I don't know, that I still think that's my favorite episode. I love that is something that can be seen in that episode, even if it was totally unintended. And at the end of the episode, the fans represented by Boimler totally call out the troll, say this is a complete sham, throws the drumhead reference out there that like, you're looking for something to hate about Star Trek. Stop. We are the fans. We're not going to listen to this. And if you're not going to have a rational discussion with us and just keep, changing goalposts and hate, then get off the block, man. There's no room for you. And then at the end, there's the lineup where Freeman is like, hey, you guys saved the day today. And they're like, hey, can you answer these questions? And she's like, nah, which is very much like the fans being, the writers being like, hey, you did a good job defending us. Hey, can we know something about canon? No.
Give us an inch.
So I've spent way too long like chewing on that, because I was going to write an article for StarTrek.com, and I'm still putting an article together about it. So yeah, it's been on my mind a lot the last couple of weeks since that episode came out. And I think that is why it's the highlight of the series for me.
Okay. Do you want me?
So I think my favorite part of Lower Decks is the testimony in Veritas. And I just love the storytelling mechanism of that. And I like, how like Rutherford, especially his part, because he's in like the meat of it. And we know that like when his implant goes offline, he like it just takes over. And I especially loved like towards the end of his testimony where he's like on the Gorn planet, or he's on what's the dag
name of the planet
where Kirk fought
Cestus 3.
It has to be that because it's the same background. They're on Cestus 3 and there's like the wedding going on, and we don't know like what happens to him after that, but we know that he survives. And so like the joke is that the important part of the story like was already told, but everyone's still interested in, like, I was at least still interested in what happened to Rutherford after, but we don't know that. And that's kind of like the joke that he just gets left on this and then it cuts off. And like, that's all we know about that, but he's alive and he's telling the story. So we know something happened, but we don't know. And that's like, we don't have enough time with these characters yet. So I think Veritas was probably my favorite episode. I just can't like rave about that enough. I also really loved the terraforming episode.
Moist Vessel.
I love like creepy old ships and like haunted ship stuff. So
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that moment with Rutherford where he keeps blacking out, what's interesting about that is, you know, the show had been billed as these are the characters who are sort of the ones that you would normally see behind the scenes in a regular Star Trek show. And while the hero crew are having their story, they're telling their episode, we're getting sort of like what's happening between the takes. And so like if Rutherford's experience had been part of a major episode, that episode would have cut out all the stuff that we saw. And instead we would have saw Rutherford, the badass who took out 2 Spocks, and Rutherford who defeated the Gorn at Cestus 3, and Rutherford who stole a bird of prey from a Vulcan museum. We would have seen that instead. It's great that it's right between the lines. It's great that we can put it together. Totally on board. Love it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that out of all of them in season 1, that is the most like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern of the series so far. Like that is what the premise of the show is the real Star Trek show, quote unquote, is happening with the main with the bridge crew up there, but we're over here looking here, and sometimes they intersect, but not like that is Rosencrantz and Guildenstern.
Oh,
that is
for sure
what that is. And I think Veritas is the one that's most really like digs into that basic kind of that premise, that idea in the most significant way so far, at least.
Yeah. And I thought the writing of that episode was in particular probably the pinnacle of season 1. Just the writing. So
now we don't want to give everybody the impression that like that's the best episode and everything else is trash. It's not. Like it's really hard to look at the show and go, which one's your favorite? Because there's like at least 4 10 out of 10s for me. Like the season finale was perfection.
Right. Season finale is like big bada boom,
right.
You know, big bada boom.
Yeah.
But writing wise, I get it. Big bada boom. But writing wise, if I'm quantifying the writing, Veritas is the pinnacle. For me.
Someone on Reddit was like, Star Trek Lower Decks undoes 30 years of tradition in Star Trek, and you click on the link and it's like no Star Trek show has any right to be that good in season 1.
Yeah. Nope, it's true. And we've talked about it. Like, what were we expecting? Picard season 1 wasn't exactly like, you know,
we do not talk about Picard season 1.
Rose colored glasses. Like, season 1 of Lower Decks was an absolute treat.
Yeah, it was.
It was. So I think we're good to wrap there, Big J, so we don't give you a 3-hour podcast to edit.
Thank you for your mercy, Watney.
Of course. I'll end your suffering. So if you'd like to support us online, you can find us at patreon.com/BeyondTrek. If you want to talk to us online, you can find us at Twitter at BeyondTrekPod or Instagram at BeyondTrekPodcast. We also have Facebook, facebook.com/BeyondTrekProductions. I want to give a very special shout out to Stephanie Baker and Jim Cook for their Anchor and Patreon donations. Thank you. We love you so much. And Brian from Starship Tempest, tell us what you've got going on and where the audience can find you.
We just finished releasing the first mission that was entirely original, that like wasn't from the book, that was entirely out of my head and we played. So we just finished releasing that mission and we're about to start into the next one. So it's really exciting. So you can find us at starshiptempest.com and all over social media as Starship Tempest on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and everything else. And just search any podcast app for Star Trek Tempest and you should find us.
So either Star Trek Tempest or Starship Tempest, one way or another, we will find you.
Yeah. I know it's a little confusing because of the two. So the actual show is Star Trek Tempest. And then all of our social media and web handles and everything is Starship Tempest.
Oh, don't give me confusing. You should hear me try to explain what Beyond Trek Productions and Beyond Trek Podcast are and how they relate. So it's I'm with you.
Yeah.
We also want to give a shout out to our cool partner and movement with Trek the Vote for Fair Elections. If you haven't registered to vote yet, and you can, we heavily encourage you to, and you can find them at Trek the Vote on Twitter.
Thank you for that, Dag. Yes, very important to get out there and vote. Well, Brian, thank you.
And if I can, just one quick thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's very important to make a plan for your vote, to sit down and figure out, okay, where is the ballot drop off, or where is my polling place? Sit down and make a plan ahead of time of how you're going to do it and what everything you need to do in order to make sure your vote is counted.
Right.
And once you do that, get a friend or a family member and make sure that they have a plan and keep it going.
Yeah, telephone.
Yeah.
Good.
So have a plan to vote. Don't just vote, have a plan to vote.
Period.
Good advice.
Mm-hmm.
And the next episode you can look forward from us about is going to be Discovery Season 3, Episode 1.
Oh, Discovery is coming
Good
right
Lord.
up.
Oh, God, guys.
That's just in a few
Are we
days.
ready for post-Federation?
Oh, God. Yeah, it's going to be.
31st century.
I'm actually ready.
I'm ready.
What is the burn?
Yeah.
You know
We
what's.
can talk about that.
Here's this really tickles me. So throughout the entire how many years, 5-10 years, fans have just been screaming for no more prequels, no more nothing. We want Star Trek that takes place after Voyager and Nemesis. That's all we want. No more looking back. So the writers of Discovery is like, all right, son of bitches, how about 930 years in the future? How's that for you?
Yeah.
Well, they
Which
wrote themselves
actually
into a
makes-
little bit of a corner. So
I'm more. I don't want to say optimistic or looking forward to it, but a little more hopeful, I guess, that season 3 will be, a little more put together. Because I think the big problem with the first 2 seasons is that they were crammed into this era as a prequel, and then there's just really very few places for them to go and tell their own story, sandwiched into this one small slice of time. And so hopefully, free of that constraints, they will be able to put together a better story.
I'm just looking forward to the EMH's backup module showing up on his shuttlecraft.
He
Yes.
absolutely better.
Better. So listeners, viewers, stay with us for our weekly reviews of Star Trek Discovery.
Yeah.
And hopefully we'll get to see the EMH.
yeah, we'll see you in the stars. Until next time.
All right. Bye.
We are Beyond Trek Podcast. Lower your inhibitions and surrender your years. We will add inspirational and hilarious Trek content to your day. Your attention will adapt to subscribe to us. Resistance is futile.